So we've come up with this idea of a framework for flipped because really, as we said before, and I seem to get a lot of nodding faces, was that everybody seemed to agree that the student should be at the centre of everything. Wow, as if anybody was going to disagree with that point. But I think we tend to get caught up in the pedagogy and the reason for this, and the research shows that and everything else, where actually you know yourself that when you're in the classroom and you're interacting with the students, the experience is completely different. And it's completely different because it's a Wednesday than it was on Tuesday, and it will be different again on Friday, and you get exactly the same cohort of students in, and the experience differs each and every time. And I think what Marina said about the idea that there is no one size fits all, I think is important to say as well. If you've got a fabulous lecture that has always been fabulous and the students rave about it, why would you want to just throw it in the bin without having a look at it first? And what we're looking at is the lecture being just the default standard, the bog standard that everybody does for fear of doing anything new and innovative and, dare we say, a bit risky. And I know that we're all risk adverse because on our DPR targets, the percentage pass rate and the percentage satisfaction does not fluctuate based on how innovative we are. It's based on how many students pass and how many students are happy. So risk is something that we inherently attempt to avoid. So how can we sort of build risk in without really there being much risk of failure? And based on that, we sort of came up with the idea of Learn, which is a very simple framework for flipped. I'm a big believer that 20 minutes, you can say it if you wish. Okay. Good grief, look. Was up for 7 minutes. You did say no technology. So,
you could wear a t-shirt next time.
Yeah, I will. But it would all be distorted around me brewer's goiter. That would be the problem. I'm a big fan of trying to do things as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And I know the guy in the previous session was a bit against sort of efficiency and effectiveness. I'm a big fan of efficiency and effectiveness. But I think that every minute that we're spending sort of attempting to structure a class, whatever, before we get into the class, is a minute we probably could have been doing something more useful. It's a minute we could have spent with the students. It's a minute we could have spent helping to reinforce learning, etc. So as I say, I'm a big fan of the 20-minute rule of only performing 20 minutes administration per week, but the students receiving feedback, personalised feedback every week. Mostly verbal feedback within the session. So I do a lot of teaching of international master's students where we run 3-hour sessions, things like that. But I am actually embedded in here now as part of this move to flip the university, etc. So these are some of my students as it happens. And this, to create a presentation, I think, again, should be about 15, 20 minutes. When I first arrived and they said, for every hour that you lecture, it takes about 3 hours to build the presentation. And I thought, how do we make any money then? If we spend 1 hour in contact with our customer and 3 hours just filling out bullet points on PowerPoint that we've looked at a book or a website that we could have just told the student to go and have a look at the book or the website. So we sort of came up with the idea of Learn, which is 5 simple steps to flipping. Now what I'm hoping is that everybody here is just going to go, that's blindingly obvious, I'm already doing it. Because I think that's where the message is getting lost at the university. Because we've obsessed about videoing our lectures, and because we're becoming obsessed with a lesser member of staff will do the delivery and a star performer will come in to do the particular keynote, we've rather missed the point of what flipped is supposed to be about. So in the Learn framework, we have these 5 steps of locate, evaluate, articulate, re-evaluate, and then naturalise, something that brings it around full circle. And as I've said before, if you're from art and design, this is teaching an old dog new tricks, really. But there are, in other parts of the university in particular, people who are very prescribed that their lecture lasts for 55 minutes, there are 48 slides, don't ask a question because I need to get through these slides. I mean, how many times do we ever hear that? We need to keep going because I've got a lot to cover. Instead of, that's a really interesting point, let's spend the rest of the session digging down into it. And the thing about flipped is that 3-hour window now becomes an opportunity for you to wander around the garden, for you to actually smell the flowers and for the students to decide which flowers have been planted. And that's quite an important thing about Flipped. I find that Flipped becomes this relaxing experience where actually you spend much more time forming a relationship with your students. So it's quite an important thing. All we really need to do with students is identify a problem domain. Just tell them what is the problem that we're trying to solve. If any of you like watching TED Talks and you are mad enough to like watching educational TED Talks, most of us have heard of Slumdog Millionaire, and the guy who's the inspiration for that, Sugata Mitra, gives a fantastic TED Talk about why it is that we're producing students for a 17th century type environment and why we're producing students for an environment that was more to do with having an empire, etc. And what is it that we're actually preparing students for now? And he is a great proponent of the idea that we should just give students questions, let them go off and find the answer and come back. If you watch his TED Talk, it's absolutely amazing. And he's got real results to show that this technique is impactful. I think students need to be able to go out and collect their own data and information. And we know about the pyramid where we have data, information, knowledge and wisdom. And we never really get to the wisdom thing because we always think that students, they're a bit young, they're a bit naive, they don't have the experience that helps to create that wisdom. What I've actually found is that by running courses that are totally flipped and my own modules that are totally flipped, because prior to this role I ran 3 courses and I was module leader for about 5 modules that were in those courses, and they all ran flipped. And what you find is at the end of it, I'd be very surprised at the end of our 12-week run if the students didn't teach me something new. If they didn't manage to combine knowledge from disparate sources and create a new viewpoint, not merely a synopsis of the recommended reading. And we don't have recommended reading, the recommendation is you read and off you go. And that's sort of the important thing for us. So it's all about them understanding then how to collect and collate, and I should have pressed that, on how to collect the information, how to find it. And of course, the thing is, we see this a lot with the library staff. Sally Patalong trundles along to every one of the induction weeks, shows everybody how to use Google Scholar correctly, how to create concatenated searches and all of these things. Everybody's tweeting, fiddling about on their phone, and then 2 days before they hand in, these lot here just go, can you help me search for this? Can you help me find that? Or as one of my first year students asked me what a paradigm was. I thought, I have no idea. It's in your coursework. It isn't, because I don't know what it means. And of course we know. He asked me what a paradigm was. They had the paper for 6 weeks. It was the day of the hand-in, and this is the first time the guys read it. And that was a module that I looked after where we were locked into delivering the lectures. So what he did was he came in for the lecture before the first hand-in, and he came in for the lecture second hand-in. And of course, if he goes away and he works hard enough, he'll pass, and everything will be great. But he'll know nothing, because he'll have only done what he needed to pass. So getting them to go out and locate information is terribly important, because it's the first part of them becoming independent learners. They start to decide what's good, they start to curate, perhaps they go mad and come in and talk to the library staff because they think it's a good idea to be proactive. They talk to their friends, they realise that things are going wrong, they've got Twitter going, they've got Facebook going, they're talking to each other, and we're attempting to force them to use the wikis inside Moodle. Why? Not much point, but of course there's all the Data Protection Act and everything else there. So I tend to find that when I first start with students, we start to do a lot of this in the classroom time, helping to get them to understand how to navigate the environment. Don't just say, go and find the answer to this, and off they go, because half of them will have a stroke. And I've paid £9,000 to do this, or with mine, I've paid £11,000 to do this. Why am I doing all of the work? So you have to create a really rich environment inside the classroom that means that if they haven't prepared, they can't engage, but they're desperate to engage because they want to impress the rest of the room, and they're desperate to engage because they want to impress you. And I find this is the thing, if you can build that relationship with them, that personable relationship, they will do it because they want to impress you. They want your approval, because we all, with the exception of a few of us, we all crave everybody's approval. For me, it's a desperate need to be loved. And for some of my students it is. I can feel it now. You've not there, there's a smile. You hadn't smiled before then, and I was feeling a distinct lack of love. So the next thing that we need to do is to apply critical thinking to it. And this is because students now have gone out, got the information for themselves, gathered data, discussed it, they've already begun to critically think. Because they've had to think, where do I get the data from? Why is Wikipedia not a great idea? Oh, hang on a minute, Roger Penrose has written this Wikipedia entry. That's got more weight than one that's been written by Alan Richards or one in red crayon by Alex Masters. We don't sort of do that, do we? So you can start to attribute weight to it. So you're already beginning to critically think, where is our value coming from? They start to discuss with each other, and they do. They do. We don't really have to drive that. In my experience, I've noticed, don't have to force them to meet or anything. And they're beginning to critically think. By the time they're in the class with you, they're already well onto that road. And then we can start to really drill it down, topic-specific, discipline-specific, the type of models or whatever that are used. They've brought those and we start to talk about the analysis. And you find that the great thing is, if you've asked them to say, analyse the macro-environmental nature of brick and mint countries, for instance, a nice little easy one to start them off with, they'll come back 5 groups with 5 different models and 5 different opinions and 5 different ways of looking at it. If I stand there and say, we're going to analyse macro environment, and I put up a model and tell them what I think, surprise, surprise, in comes the written coursework with my model and my opinion underneath. If they've gone out themselves, they've got much more from it. So the evaluation is terribly important for them. I would like you to stop and disagree with me at any point, and I can tell you why you're wrong, if any of you would like to say, but it kind of works. But as you can see, we're trying to get away from flipped, really, because if you go online and you look at flipped, it's not what Coventry wants to do. What they want to do, really, is take you as domain experts and extract every last drop of juice out of you and get that into the student's mind and get the students adding to the mix. Because it's got to be that if 60 students have gone out and had a look at something, one of them is going to know something about that that you don't know. And I would consider that to be a plus. If you can tell me something I don't know, I consider you to have done a good job. So this articulation happens in class, yes?
Alan,
Yes, Upton.
I just want to say, I think that's a really important point and not to be skated over, and you may actually be coming onto this in a minute. The amount of confidence it takes to stand up and accept that your group of students may know more than you is one huge step. Now, I personally don't care. I love it because it means I get to learn stuff, blah, 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 blah. But I know I've talked to a lot of people who feel that they actually have to be the expert in the room, and I think that's one of the hurdles, perhaps, that we need to address.
Yeah,
Just a comment.
I think it is, because not only the fear of not knowing, but the fact that if your students see you as not being the all-knowing oracle, again, they feel as if they've been shortchanged for their fees. So you've got to get on board with them. The parent-child relationship has got to be ripped up once and for all. They've got to be made fully aware from day one that success or failure is your fault. Don't thank me for your distinction, I just marked it. And don't complain to me about your failure, I just marked it. Your learning is up to you. But if you get on board, become part of the community, I can promise you the greatest chance of being successful. And that's really where the articulation comes in now. We're beginning to look at the communication method and medium. So if you're in one of my classes, you'll present every single week for 12 weeks, through from the first week to the very last week. You'll present using a different method for each summative assessment and a different method for each formative assessment. And you have to stand up, you have to talk for 1 minute, and then the rest of the room is free to attack your point. And the more they attack you, the more marks they get, and the better you defend, the more marks you get. Now, because I teach IT strategy, the way that we do this is we have a share price. Every student starts off with 300 pence, this is worth 20% of the module mark, and based on their ability to ask and answer questions, it can fluctuate by up to plus or minus 3 pence per question. This now means that if you have done a lot of work and you've only had a minute to speak, you've now got this opportunity that every time somebody asks a question, you can show how much more you know, how much more you know. And we're looking at exploring to the boundary of your knowledge. And remember that with students now, being able to stand up and do this is as important as being able to write any report. When they go for a job interview, nobody asks them to sit down and write a 3,000-word report. They ask them to stand up and give a 5-minute presentation. Every assessment centre they go to with their degrees for their for their graduate jobs, they're all expected to stand up and talk. And if they can't do it, they don't get the job. And that's why we see so many first-class students who can't get on to the graduate employment. Because it's not about having the best answer, it's about being able to convince people that your answer is most plausible. So we work on this lots and lots. So the articulation is really important because the written document is becoming less important and vocalisation more. And the shooting of video, I get them to make the videos. I don't like it. That really puts me off. Really puts me off. But the students don't seem to be anywhere near as bothered. It's their world, it's their technology, so I let them make the videos. So I tend to sort of give out the phone and the iPad, and I've got little brackets. And I give it to the noisiest person in the room who doesn't listen to what I'm saying, and it gives them a focus. And they go off and they video everybody else, and then other people in the room do the editing, and I get the videos back all ready to go. So I don't do it, they do it, and they want to do it.
Can I ask a question before you move on?
You can if it's a short one.
Very short. Yeah, I mean, very impressed because say you've got international students, and I find articulation and consciousness of their English can be an impediment to speaking. How do you resolve that?
Well, for starters, we don't mark on your ability to speak English. We mark on your ability to communicate your idea. So if you are timed, if you're not very good, the timing, we restart the clock if you can't articulate your point, your questions so that you can explore it more. But the fact is that we expect them to have a standard of English when they arrive that they can engage with the course. I find actually that I don't have any problems with students' ability to speak English because most of them, well, all of them, can speak it well. It's nerves that sends you off into the ums and I can't think of the word. We need to have an environment where we're all together, we're all equal. Nobody criticises you unless they critique the point. And if you fluff it and you can't, you're allowed to sit down, somebody else goes and then you stand up and do it again. Because what we're looking for is we're looking for what's in your head. We're not looking for your ability to be a fantastic orator. Yes?
Just on that point, because you're talking in a very specific clause. Sorry, Alan, I was pages to watch. But just to say, I think what's exciting about some of the modern technologies around is that it gives people different ways to articulate. And certainly when I've worked with internationals, I get them to articulate using video and film and stuff like that. And the stuff that comes out when you see what people are putting up and we're discussing is absolutely phenomenal because they've been able to do it in their own time, in their own articulation with the right scaffolding and facilitation. So just to widen the point, in your case, yes, standing up and talking, maybe, but there are a lot of other ways.
Yeah, and this is why they get to make videos as well, where they can practice. I would hasten to add that for all presentations, you're not allowed any notes. You must speak off the cuff. You're not allowed to read from any notes whatsoever. It must come from within. And all of these modules are 99.9% international students. There's usually sort of one every other cohort. Yes?
I'm taking the assumption that they're postgrads.
Some are, but there's some first years as well. It's mostly postgrads, but there's first year aviation management as well. Actually, you'd be quite surprised they do better than the postgrads in the initial videos. And I do tend to get them into each other's classes. So the postgrads are expected to come along and watch the undergrads present because they always think they're really good. And then you get these bunch of 18-year-olds who are cocksure of themselves, all look beautiful, all stood there doing this. And then the guy realises that the reason I got 42% was actually I was rubbish. And these are 18 and they've just come in and they haven't been tainted by the way that we mark or assess them. So I'm hoping, well I know, that after they present we go through a re-evaluation process. You've got the questions and answers, but also we've got things like a bullseye on the wall. So just before you start to present your group, you put your group number onto the bullseye. And we have fail, pass, merit, distinction and outstanding in the centre. And they put where they think their group is going to be. They present, then the room votes and they put where they're going to be. And then as the arbiter of doom, I walk up and put it where it's going to be. And what you find is first 3 sessions, they think they've done really well because they've worked half a day on it. Next 3 sessions, they've spent an hour every day working on it, and they think they're worse than they're going to be. We've managed that expectation now, and therefore they've upped their game. I find all of it is just about relationships. If you've got a relationship with them, if they care about it, they'll do it. And it's nearly always, even in the aviation management, it's nearly always the international team that gets the highest grade. They'll tend to get stuck into it a bit more as well. But it's all about that. And afterwards, they have to discuss with each other as well and argue why their point was better than somebody else's. And if you've got enough groups, you might actually pair them off. They argue and they come up with a homogenised, well, hopefully a sort of an improved presentation. No PowerPoint is allowed. We do not allow PowerPoint because everybody uses PowerPoint. They can use anything they like except PowerPoint or Keynote. So they can use Sway, Prezi, Slate, anything. But also they can use any non-electronic device. I only insist that one presentation is electronic. So for instance, one of them decided to do a mind map. It was Christmas. They brought in a Christmas tree, hung everything on in baubles that they had printed with their various things. It's quite surprising how much they get out of that and how much effort they put into it. But of course, while they're thinking about the form, they're actually thinking about the content. And because you've given a very simple question, the questions are only tweeted 7 days beforehand in, you're put into a new group on that day for the next week. So if you're not in the room, you're not in a group. So you have to attend. And then you present. And the rest of the room essentially votes on you. But this gives you an opportunity to constantly reevaluate and lots of feed forward. That was really good, this wasn't very good, etc. And from their colleagues as well. What did you like most, what didn't you like, etc. And teach them to be critical of each other. Because when you're in the group, everybody's going, yeah, that's great. Where in the back of their mind, they're thinking, that was terrible. And you need to get that to the front of the head. Say, actually, take your hands out your pockets, stop staring out the window, make sure you know what you're talking about. Yes?
Do you spend time giving them feedback skills, how to feed back to each other?
Yes, they do all of that early doors. So we have a lot to do with feedback, but I'm very much interested in feed forward because I want to know what it is that could have been done better today that is going to up your grades next week. And because we've got a grade every week, whether it be formative or summative, we are seeing an upward curve. And on its last iteration, well, in fact, on every iteration, bar the first one, all students pass on the first attempt. And in the last iteration, the worst grade was 60%. Now, so much so that we have a second marker, not a moderator, because the grades end up being quite outlandish. Because all of the students are there, all of the students have read, all of the students stand up and present, all of the students are keen. There's not a single disengaged person. This is anything up to about 60 students. But it's not me, it's them. It's just creating the environment like the grassy knoll here. It's creating an environment that just gives you backache and forces you to move around a little bit and do something more interesting. And finally, it's all about the condensing of this knowledge into wisdom. Because students always have this idea that they finish this module, all that knowledge now is compartmentalised, we're done, we start again. So why, when I'm talking to them about IT strategy, why aren't they bringing in a model from marketing, a model from finance? Why aren't we cross-pollinating these things? So trying to get them to understand and naturalise the information into this homogeneous whole and that isn't solid and floats around, and actually now, because of this opinion, they decide this opinion is no longer valid and they throw it away. And they bring in new things. And what I want them to leave with is not the education I received when I took the course, and not the ideas, the models and the beliefs that I've got, but the ones that they've got based on what they've done in the environment. And all it is just these simple steps. If anybody was shocked by those steps, I would be shocked. They're simple. The whole point is KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. It's really important that we keep it simple. And Flicked has just gone off into this array where we all have to be Tom Cruise and we have to be in a television studio and we can't fluff a word. Nonsense. Go over to the engineering faculty, go down into the basement and they've got spanners in their hands and they're fiddling about with things. Go over to art and design, they're all splattered in paint. Go over to physiotherapy and they've got skeletons there and they're poking and prodding and labelling and all the rest of it. It's not them. It's just the lecture environment that we need to sort of curtail and only do it when it's the most valuable way to communicate information. And I think 12 o'clock I was dead. Any questions? Observations? Don't be too cruel as I'm very thin-skinned.
If I may.
Yes?
I'm sort of trying to apply the quote that David brought in his talk from Sarah Ramsden about learning being a way how we sort of reshape our conception of reality. And not just applying that to students, but ourselves here as well as teachers, sort of how we see the reality of our jobs. My question sort of will eventually lead into how far that may be just in my subject, which is sort of film and media and so on, where things now happen to change very rapidly. So where I know if I'm telling the students the way I've led projects and financed them and managed them and marketed them and so on, that's all quite old hat, and they need to engage with a completely different.
That's the beautiful thing about Flipped is we're not teaching them how to do anything. We're asking them to find out how things should be done. And we can use our experience and what we've done, but really it's anecdotal evidence. It may not be relevant anymore, as you say. I mean, my degree was in computing. I am a gibbering idiot now when I sit in front of a computer. I've got no idea because it's so many years ago and I've been involved in things that have got nothing to do with computing. That knowledge is just obsolete. But it doesn't mean that telling them about it is obsolete. It gives them contextualization. It forms part of the continuum of learning. But again, if you go and have a look at the Siddhartha Mitra video, he'll say that all you need really is a good question. If you ask a good question, they'll find out what the answer should be. They'll find out what form the answer should take and how they implement it. The biggest problem for us is how we make that relevant to our discipline. Because for business, it's easy. It's wishy-washy nonsense at the end of the day. Loads of companies can follow exactly the same strategy. One goes down the toilet and one becomes Apple. What happens when you're teaching nursing, etc., and you're using very prescribed facts? Well, there are different tools and techniques then you can use for that. But why aren't you getting students to go out and find the answers to very technical questions and then teach each other the answer to those questions? And you are still the domain expert with that. You still know whether the answer to that is correct or not. And if you don't, well, one of the students has videoed it. That's a very interesting point. I think we'll visit that next week when we have more time, which is code for, I've no idea what you've just said. I need to look at the video, Google it, and then come back with an answer. But I don't need to lose anything from it. I can say, oh, actually, that's really interesting. And then when I come back and we discuss that answer, then I can say, I needed 7 days to go and look at that because I've never heard of it before. But you've not lost anything from that. You've not lost anything from your interaction with them. So I'm not sure whether our experiences, going out of phase with what's going on actually has any negative impact. I think actually it can be a catalyst for positive creation.
Well,
hold on, we just need to get another one.
Yeah, I mean, we've tried it in the past over EC. We've admittedly probably not correctly because it wasn't sold very well, maybe. But we have a lot of resistance from students to going out and finding that information. You get the, why am I paying you? You're going to do it. So how do we counter that? Okay, yes, better learning design maybe or things like that. But when you haven't got motivated students, and a lot of our
wash your mouth out. They're all motivated. They're just not motivated to be here. That's all.
Yeah. Or some just want to be handed a piece of paper. But how do we get those engaged with the program?
This is it. Funnily enough, my wife just made that point this morning. She teaches Portuguese here for academic development and whatnot, and she said that she ran a shop last semester, to get them to talk about buying products and prices. So they were using numbers, using language, everything else. And this is for academics and professional services staff, so it's for us. And nobody wanted to do the activity, they just wanted to repeat words from the board. After having done 3 weeks of the activities, the feedback was that was the best thing about it. Because what they needed to do was get over the hurdle of this is really embarrassing, this is going to be hard work, etc. And start to say, well, actually, the value I've got out of this is important. And I wonder sometimes whether we should be asking the students whether they want to do it or actually whether they've enjoyed doing it. Because as soon as they've burst that bubble of being petrified of speaking in front of anybody else, or of thinking that all they need to do is look at the lecture slides in order to get their degree, next thing you know, you're off. We've all experienced it. I mean, I'm a man with no GCSEs and no A-levels because I failed everything at school. Education is something I discovered later. The hunger to know was something that didn't arrive till I was in my mid-20s, really. Now I just can't stop. You find that we've flipped more of them, but you're not going to turn them all. The miserable little sod is the miserable little sod regardless of which way you've taught them. But what you hope to do is to get enough of them. And if you can create a critical mass, what you find as well is they start to close around those that struggle and they help them. And you don't hear about any of the problems because they've moved in around them. And students with disabilities don't make any provision for them at all. The community changes and absorbs them. And instead of us making special provisions that just moves them further to the perimeter, we create an environment where everybody was equal the moment they walked, rolled, whatever, through the door, and they were all together. And I'm afraid now I've run over by 5 minutes. Is it luncheon?
No, there's a keynote.
It's a keynote. Then I think better go to Jackie's keynote because I don't want to have my ear chewed off tomorrow when I come back into work. Have I? I thought it was... Ah. It doesn't say that on my thing. I didn't look at it. It was paper. We don't do paper. So in that case, then we've still got some time for more questions. Can you stop talking and ask me a question now? Yes, please. Not so smart now. That's how you deal with students that talk while you're talking. Yes. Yes?
I'm a librarian and I'm looking at the model which is learn model and see that this is somewhere that the library can really kind of relate to what you're doing and feed in. I wonder how we're in the library, how you work with library staff.
Well, really, it's only been with Sally Passalong in the past because of being in EEC. But it hasn't really evolved past. Sally comes along and shows everybody how to perform research. She does get involved in various other elements, but I'm really keen on an environment where the students see the library as somewhere to come and gain knowledge, not somewhere to come and have a kip and then have something to eat and go home again. So I'm really interested in creating more of an environment outside of the classroom where the library staff, I've talked to Phil about this actually, are engaged with helping the student understand the learning experience and, you know, trying to get them to get a thirst for knowledge, a thirst for finding out what the answer is instead of waiting for you to tell them what the answer is and then they regurgitate it in the exam. Once we sort of get past, I find it's 3 weeks, 3 sessions. At the 3rd session, that's the switching moment. And what we found is at that point, they found that there's nowhere to hide. They can't do it. You've been picked on. We don't ask for volunteers for questions. We say, you, question, now. And they give a question. They stand up and they give the question to the rest of the room and somebody else stands up and gives the answer. And we just eliminate embarrassment and self-consciousness because nobody is ridiculed for it. But it's in this environment where everybody can be challenged on every point. And also there's a game where you get a reward of some sort at the end of the module for the person who can find the most errors in what I'm saying when I'm talking. So they're all Googling like mad. And when they're presenting, their references are up on the screen. And anybody in the room who finds that that reference is not valid gets extra grades for their group. So I don't check whether they've just done what a lot of students do, which is just grab a reference, stick it in, and you find that it's a reference to Donald Duck and they're talking about hyperbolic equations. And that's so they hunt and kill each other. So it's a little pack and they extract the weak. But what they attempt to do is extract the weak part of the personality and replace it with a strong one. And I should have shown you some videos actually of them, but they're boring because they're talking about macroeconomics, etc. But all of the students are there and they decorate the room. One of them did a presentation on why Coca-Cola is evil. Actually evil, biblically evil. And so they went for a biblical explanation of evil and then they showed Coca-Cola and they showed all of its business practices and then they showed how every one of those is backed up by taxation, free market economics and government structure, which were the actual learning outcomes. but we started by Coca-Cola Is Evil. And at the end of it, if anybody thought Coca-Cola wasn't evil, they were mad, because it was proof beyond any doubt that essentially their practices, and we see this, don't we, now with Mexico, with them feeding it as a health drink through mothers, and their children's teeth are coming out rotten, and they've actually been selling it as a health drink. So, yes.
So I'm chomping here, You're saying really key, nowhere to hide, and I agree with you absolutely completely on that. I think the whole point of an environment like that, there is nowhere to hide. But I think also, and I don't know whether it's coming through in your words, is it's also an environment where people can be safe and people can make mistakes, and within that, that's where the learning happens. It's not a terrifying experience.
Yes.
It's a safe one.
Yeah, there is no failure. If what you say isn't the answer we were looking for, our job is to find an answer or a question that fits to. Because if you've come out with something and it's a bit left field of what we were talking about, it's probably a perfectly valid point. It's just not valid for the point we're making. So let's change the skin on that. Let's envelop it in something that is relevant. So we tend to have a rule that we never say no in class. I know this is very wishy-washy psychology claptrap, but it's true. As soon as you say to somebody, no, that's wrong, that's the last time you will ever hear from that person. They'll never stand up again. If you say, well, actually, that's a really good point, but it fits better here, and then somebody else says something, and what you found is that you're able to take risks devoid of the fear of failure. But it doesn't mean that you're never, ever wrong. You know, if this is your leg bone and this is your head, I don't want you operating on me next time I have to go into hospital. So we need to fix that. But we don't need to do it in a way that makes them feel small, makes them feel like taking a risk was a negative thing. And that's something that needs generating. But if you were ever in my class, there's a lot of shouting that's on. There's a lot of taking the piddle out of each other goes on. There's a lot of that. But we've created an environment where it's like being with your family. It's exactly what you said, it's safe. So you can explore it, and you can say obtuse things, and you can say things that are left of field, and then we'll go off on that journey. And the great thing about not having lecture slides, and that is, you don't have that pre-described content you have to go through. You're concentrating on the learning outcome, not content. Because the fact is, if you don't use the things you had, but you still achieve the learning outcome, mission accomplished. Because your assessment should always be written to assess the learning outcome, not to apply a very specific model or whatever, but if it has to, then you just make sure that when you ask them the question, you prescribe the model that they need to explore. And you've covered that there. But with mine, you know, it will be very short questions, like it will be, we had to talk about technology and how it sort of enforces society, how it influences society. So I heard a radio thing, and it was Bobby's on the tweet, which was all about the use of Twitter by the police to quell rioting and civil unrest. And I just wrote, Bobby's on the tweet, discuss. And they've got their intended learning outcomes on Moodle. They know that when they talk about that, they must fulfill this outcome. And whatever they do from that point on is up to them. How you repurpose that for your discipline has its own challenges, etc. But to me, that's what flipped is. It's about creating an environment where I want to come to work and they want to come to class, and I will never repeat the same thing twice, let alone every semester ad nauseum for 25 years. No wonder people are disenfranchised with teaching. Learning is where we need to focus it. We need to be sat there amazed by what they're telling us, not full of self-importance because we've got a doctorate. I'm only saying that because I just got mine. Yeah, I got mine last week. And therefore, they're completely unimportant until you're in our house where I insist the wife addresses me as doctor. Needless to say, I'm in the spare room. Any more questions? Yes, sorry, I ignored you.
What I want to say regarding the question that you made, I think perhaps if we can assign some specific task for the topic that we want to teach in our lecture, for students to do before the lecture, and asking them to come to the lecture with some ideas. Yeah, and we are going to address those ideas perhaps in the first 20 minutes of the lecture.
We went down this road of before next lecture, you know, find out about this subject. The problem is you get 40% of the students do something, the other 60% turn up, well, they're going to tell me.
Yeah.
You-
And I think that's where you have to engineer that environment where there isn't a 60% of the room that chooses not to engage. And I think sometimes, you know, people will say to us, flip, and there you go. And what you do then is you think, all right, I'll record all my lectures and I'll do these things, and then think, well, nobody's engaged with it. And actually, in order to get them to engage, you've got to really move it all to one side. Start again and start with the environment, start with the relationships, because it's all about people, it's all about passion, you know, and it's all about purpose. And it's those 3 P's that I've just made up now that are terribly important. And Ian Dunn keeps ranting on about passion. But you see that all the time. Students don't give a damn what you're saying if you're saying it in an exciting manner. They're with you. They're there. They're on the journey. And I find that we run these sessions 6 till 9, and it's 9:30 before I can get out of the room, because they want to show me what they've done. And perhaps, you know, because I'll ask every student to produce a presentation and then pick 10 people at random to stand up and give it. But you don't know whether it's going to be you. So you've done the presentation and you've had 20 minutes to put it together. And you're not allowed to read from any notes. And you're not allowed to have any words on any of your slides, maybe one week, whatever. And I throw it out and say, right, everybody, we did really well last week. How do we make it more difficult for this week? And some smart ass will say, no words on the slides. Brilliant! No words on the slides it is then. And you go first. And then they all stand up and off they go. And each time, something that they found fearful becomes fun. And like everything else, why can't we prize them away from their PS4s? Because it's fun. Why can't we get them into the classroom? Because it isn't fun anymore. Let's make education fun, and then I can get kicked off. Thank you.